Since starting my YouTube channel, you all have come up with some great questions about the process of starting and managing a nonprofit organization, especially the legal aspects of that. So today I am super excited to be with a friend of mine, Richard BOBHOLZ from Law++, the company he founded and that focuses on nonprofit organizations. And we are going to talk through some of the most common legal questions that you all ask about nonprofits and their answers. We've got a bit to cover, so this is actually going to be a 2-video series where we will talk through some of these common questions. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more content all about starting a nonprofit or other type of social impact project. So before we get into some of these questions, I do want to hear a little bit more about you because you're not a typical lawyer and Law++ is not a typical law firm, so what makes you different?
Hopefully a lot. I guess personally, what I think makes myself and my law firm different is how I approach the practice of law. So my approach is I want law to be accessible to everyone, regardless of where they're coming from, what their income is, and I have programs that help with that. I also want to make it so that it's more transparent. That's always been a big issue with me. I actually hired lawyers before I became a lawyer, and it really bothered me that they just couldn't give me any straight answers. The answer was always maybe, or it depends, which sometimes is the answer, but going further and explaining why that's the answer. And it surprisingly did not dawn on me until I asked my CPA a question, and I asked how much it was going to cost, and he said it's going to be between $100 and $1,000. And I'm like, well, I'd like to know. And then it just hit me right at that moment. I'm like, so my clients also probably want to know. So as often as I can, I make sure that pricing is transparent. I make sure that if someone says that this is my budget, we keep to that budget, or I let them know, how we're going to work within that. And then just me, I try to be more approachable, less of the stuffy mahogany desk lawyer that the stereotypical lawyer in most TV shows. I try to avoid that as best I can.
Well, I love that, but I do have to say this is not a sponsored video. I just really think Richard is cool. Okay. Yeah. So getting into these questions, I have heard lots of these questions before, and you said that these are the questions you get most frequently as well.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. So these are the things that you all want to know. And the first question I want to have you talk through a little bit about is, what is the difference, I suppose in legal terms, also just practically, between a nonprofit and a for-profit business?
Yeah, so that's the most common question, or at least the most common thing that people really wonder about when they're starting up a nonprofit, or sometimes they're starting up a for-profit that could be a nonprofit.
Right.
And so for the most part, there is a huge gray area between nonprofit and for-profit. There's a lot of things that can be both, and those can be like social entrepreneur companies. But the major difference, I guess there's 2 major differences between nonprofits and for-profits, is taxation and ownership. And so from a tax perspective, nonprofits don't pay an income tax on the actual revenue that they generate for most of the stuff they generate. If they do things that are purely for-profit activities, they do have to pay an income tax on that.
Unrelated business income. We
Yes.
talked about this.
Yes, exactly. Whereas actually in most small businesses, they don't end up paying an income tax either, because all of that money is paid out either as salary or expenses. And so tax-wise in the small business realm, they're really taxed the same. It's just the difference between filing your business income tax or a 990 with the IRS. When you get into larger organizations, then it makes a big difference. Ownership, in my opinion, is the bigger difference. And so no one really owns a nonprofit. So what that means is that it's kind of owned by the state. It's kind of it's its own realm, and it's managed by a board of directors, and then the board of directors appoints officers and employees, managers, to run the nonprofit. Instead of, let's say, a solely owned LLC, you get to be the owner, you get to be the manager. You can sell it, you can trade it, you can do anything that you otherwise legally could do with your own property. In a nonprofit, that's not the case. You are beholden to the state laws and then the orders your board of directors gives you.
I would say that's probably one of the most common questions I get from y'all is about that. This idea of not owning something that you started it can be very confusing to people. And so, yeah, thank you for clearing that up.
Oftentimes that makes the difference. When someone wants to start a business, if they really care about owning it and being the sole person who can control what happens to it, then that's a big consideration to have. You can still have a very significant nonprofit mission with a for-profit company. You can't own the nonprofit in the same way.
That's right. Okay, so let's say someone now understands the difference between nonprofit and for-profit / privately owned business, and they say, I definitely want to do nonprofit. What are some of the advantages of, in this case, I'm specifically talking about the 501c3 status, the advantages of that, and what are some of the steps people need to take to prepare to file to get that 501c3 status?
Sure. Although the tax code is, enormous. I don't know most of it, but the main advantages that I see that people look for with 501c3 are donations, grants, and I guess some level of legitimacy. So if you're dealing with certain organizations, certain corporations, they only want to work with 501c3s. That's the legitimacy side. If someone's willing to give you a lot of money to, get 501c3, absolutely, that is a good factor.
Advantage.
As far as the grants are concerned, that one's also, it depends on the organization. Some organizations will only give grants to 501c3 organizations. Some don't care. You can even be a for-profit company and get grants. It depends on the application you submit and what you're actually going to do with the grant money. The donations, however, is the big part. So individuals giving to a normal nonprofit, those donations are not tax deductible on their tax return.
Hold on, what's normal? What do you mean?
So, absolutely. So a nonprofit versus a 501c3, you can be a nonprofit and not have any tax recognition through the IRS. And that makes you essentially just a private nonprofit. You don't have any charitable donations, tax benefit there, but you can still operate as a nonprofit under the nonprofit tax code. It just ends up being one without the benefits of the 501c3. And then...
and then the steps.
Yes.
So they're gonna do it. How do you do it?
Right before that, the 501c3 organization is one of only a couple that donations by individuals can be tax deductible on their tax returns. And that's just pure donations. If a company wants to give you money for performing a service, that is still that's deductible as a business expense as long as they're getting a value out of that. So that's another way to work without having 501c3 to get donations into your company in essence, donations. So the process is actually pretty straightforward. You start out, you have to get your nonprofit articles of incorporation. In North Carolina, it's a pretty simple process. It's a $60 filing fee, and the Secretary of State actually has an online filing system now for that. So it makes it really easy. The caveat I tell people is when it says are there members, you generally always click no on that box because members for a nonprofit means something different than you just saying,
right.
Yeah, we have members, people who are sustainers, basically. That's not a member for legal definition. A member is someone who can vote. So
they have power.
They have power, exactly.
Right.
And to make any changes in your organization, you have to actually get a quorum of the people who have ever been members who are still members. And so that creates, that's a headache that I see some people encounter. We can deal with it. It's a headache that's easy to avoid.
For those who don't know what a quorum is.
Yes, a quorum is the minimum number of people you have to have attending a meeting in order for any vote to be able to be taken and passed. And so if you have 100 members in your organization, actual scenario I dealt with, they had 100 members, they could only ever get about 8 people to show up to a meeting.
Ooh.
And they needed, I don't know the exact number, but it's at least 50% of their members to show up to a meeting, to even change those articles, to remove the member aspect of it, to be able to vote on whether or not to get 501c3 recognition. So it created a headache, easy to avoid just by clicking we don't have members. You can still have people who pay you. You can still call them members, just not legal members on that form.
Gotcha.
After that, you have to obtain an employer identification number, and then you file Form 1023 or 1023 Easy, depending upon how much revenue and the types of charitable work you do. And then you get your solicitation license and a bank account, and you're pretty well set up, assuming the IRS gives you the recognition for the 501c3.
What happens though if someone says, okay, I don't think we're gonna bring in that much revenue, so they go ahead and they do the 1023 Easy, but then actually they get in a lot more revenue than they expected. Are they in trouble with the IRS now?
They're not in trouble. So their actual recognition can be in jeopardy. They may have to file the original application, the full application again, to maintain their status. Because the 1023 Easy is so new, there haven't actually been that many who have had to go through that process. I'd say it's 5 years old.
Okay.
And you have to show that you're going to make an average of $50,000 or less per year for the first 3 years. So realistically, the IRS isn't going to flag anyone until after 3 years.
Right.
So it hasn't come up a lot, but there's a theory that everyone's going to have to redo it if they exceed the amount.
I guess if you are successfully bringing in that much revenue and it was more than you thought, then that's kind of a small problem.
Yeah, at that point, you just do the full application. The full application is not actually that hard, and the filing fee is now $600 for the full application, whereas the easy application is $275. So the money difference is not great. It's just the amount of content they want. And if you're running a great nonprofit, you got all your ducks in a row, you're going to have the information they're looking for. Because the harder things are who's on your board,
right.
What's your narrative, what's your fundraising activities look like, and it's pretty easy after that.
Yeah.
And again, that's an entirely online application now as well, which is great.
Another one that I've heard is, can you be a nonprofit and have a for-profit partnership?
Yeah, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of people.
Of course it does.
And so you can have a for-profit, contracts out some of the stuff they do to you and you make some money. That's great. You can be a nonprofit who contracts some of the stuff out to a for-profit. That's great too. That's just independent contractors. And then you can have one where it's kind of, you guys do the same thing, but let's say you're offering some sort of social service and you have a nonprofit arm that provides for low-income individuals, and then you have a for-profit arm that charges based on some sort of income, so that you can provide the same service to everyone.
Like a social enterprise.
Exactly, like a social enterprise, but actually with a nonprofit arm instead of a social enterprise is generally a for-profit.
Right.
That just does both in the same company.
Okay. All right. I'm very intrigued to hear the answer to this one.
Okay.
Can you sell a nonprofit?
No. I actually hear it a lot, and the answer is no, because you don't own it, so you just can't sell something you don't own.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, well that brings us to the end of part 1 of this video. I'm really curious to hear from you. What did we miss so far? What are some questions still on your mind? Please stick those in the comments below. Don't forget to check out my website, foundertofulltime.com, if you need some additional guidance on how to start a nonprofit. And of course, I will, as I mentioned before, leave Richard's website in the description as well. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel for more videos on this topic. And final thing, if you are on Facebook, check out my group, Change the World or Bust, to join the conversation all about making an impact in the world, especially through nonprofit leadership. Thank you again so much. Hope to see you next time.